All right, and this is the part of our symposium to get semi-serious. I would give out our Jerry B. Duvall Public Service Award. And there's Jerry there. Let me tell you a little bit about Jerry and what this award means to us. As you can tell by today's festivities, while we like to have a good time, we take our policy work very, very seriously. And we owe that all to Jerry Duvall. When I was a junior staffer at the FCC, I used to give Jerry a ride home. And I would learn about this business, because there was actually a time in telecom policy where people took it seriously. And he also took George under his wing. And I remember walking in, it must be over 20 years ago, and he looked at me, and he and George were working, and just like, there were some curves. He goes, "Hey, George, isn't it amazing how those lawyers all think those curves work in a straight line?" I got to leave before I get my butt into it. But Jerry taught us that you can do public policy with honor and integrity and honesty and with rigor. And unfortunately, that is in very short supply these days in telecom policy. Again, I've been doing this for a very long time. I have seen it go up, I've seen it go down, and I think unfortunately we're at a bit of a nadir. I have never seen it quite this bad. When the President of the United States, rather than file substantive comments, and the FCC has NTIA or his agency do it, but encourages more collectivism, that tells you about the lack of seriousness in telecom policy. I think it's not to put too fine a point on it. I think we're at a real national embarrassment. These are very complex issues. These are very hard. I think you've seen the agency become increasingly politicized. The quality of the work has gone down across the board. I can tell you that the journal, some of the journals, papers that we've seen, have just been naked advocacy rather than serious work. I'm on a conference board. I can tell you that the quality of the work at conferences has gone down. I mean, twice this year, to give you just a quick example. People had done some work, and George had called them out. It was just flat wrong. And the response they gave to us was, well, we're not trying to get it published in the journal. Say, no, it's worse. You're trying to get people to make policy on this and to put out work that's just nakedly wrong. In fact, this year, I had somebody actually nakedly plagiarize me. And his work was still wrong. They eventually stopped it. I mean, that's the level of debate. So what we try to do with our award is to find, as we like to say, who's your target audience at the Phoenix Center? The conscientious policymaker, a small and often marginalized group. But we do try and find them. And they are rare, and they are to be celebrated. I think that's what we need. Telecom issues continue to be extremely hard. They deserve to be approached with rigor. And that's why this year we were pleased to give it to our friend, Commissioner Ajit Pai. I've known Ajit for many years, even back when he was back in the Commission's Office of General Counsel. In fact, I remember one of the earlier many travel battles, Ajit and I ran into each other at a reception, and I said, "Do you guys at the Commission stop relying on precedent?" But fortunately, Ajit has been in the position to do something about it. He has truly been putting the finger in the dike of what I would call just an onslaught of just absolutely horrific work and analysis. And that has not been an easy task. Fortunately, he has been up to that task and has done a fantastic job in terms of providing serious legal work. My only complaint is I wish he'd cite us a little bit more. But he has stood up and provided truly a beacon in a very, very dark time these days. And with that, when we think about what Jerry has invited to us, we think about it to Ajit. And so I will read the inscription. One quick thing, your staff actually mentioned that since the World Series, he's been cordial. The award says, in recognition of your exercise of political courage and contribution of analytical to the United States telecom policy today. And so Ajit is with great pride and great gratitude that we bestow our awards on this year. So my friend, come on up. Our only requirement that we do ask is that you display it prominently in your office. Absolutely.
I put it right next to my recent award from the Sports Fan Coalition, which was literally a red styrofoam finger, and I told folks I've never seen so proud to have to get the finger that I was from the Sports Fan Coalition. But Thank you, Larry, for that warm introduction. I'm so honored to be here with you, with friends of the Phoenix Center, and to accept the Jerry B. Duvall Public Service Award. Jerry's civil service, as everybody knows, has been exemplary. Since 1978, he has advised countless commissioners and bureau chiefs and others in our field. He's been a prodigious economist covering virtually every sector of the communications industry. He's explored non-price competition in the broadcast sector. He's studied how regulatory barriers to entry deter competition in the cable market. He has explained how concentrated markets can be highly competitive. And he's examined the sunk costs of satellite launches. It's precisely because my own career, by comparison, has been much less distinguished and much shorter that I'm humbled to receive this award. I can only hope that I live up to Jerry's good name in the years to come. I also appreciate this opportunity to address the Phoenix Center, and that is because since the force that is the Phoenix Center awakened 17 years ago, you've offered policymakers rigorous economic analysis and legal acumen that is truly second to none. Reading Phoenix Center publications always gives me, you might say, a new hope that common sense and logic will rule the day in tech policy. Whenever shoddy reasoning enters the public dialogue, your scholars strike back and return to the facts. Not facts, elegant weapons for a more civilized age. You are the rebels seeking to contain the government's regulatory empire. Now, let's start with one fact that the Phoenix Center repeatedly points out. Competition in the communications marketplace is a force to be reckoned with. By the FCC's last count, 99.6% of Americans can choose from at least 3 wireline telephone competitors, and 92% can choose from 10 or more. 97% of Americans have 3 or more facilities-based mobile operators competing for their business, while over 91% have 4 or more. And 4,462 internet service providers are competing to offer broadband across the United States. And they're doing it in a variety of ways. They're upgrading from copper to fiber. They're upgrading from DSL to IP-based technologies like carrier-grade Ethernet. They're rolling out 4G LTE using small cells and distributed antenna systems. They're building very high-speed networks based on the DOCSIS 3.0 standard. And they're launching satellites and now even balloons specially made to offer high-speed broadband to remote areas. To paraphrase Obi-Wan Kenobi, competition is what gives the free market its power. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, it permeates us. It binds the communications galaxy together. And the result is that the Bell-era monopolies that Congress sought to control through tariffing, through accounting, and pervasive regulation just don't exist anymore. Almost half of US households have given up the landline. 45% rely only on wireless phones. And more than half of the residential landlines that remain are VoIP connections. To put it another way, the once dominant incumbents lost over 55 million switched access lines from 2008 to 2013, and they now serve barely a quarter of all households. What a remarkable transformation that is in such a short period of time. And yet, every time the FCC looks at the marketplace, it brings to mind the words of Emperor Palpatine. You will find that it is you who is mistaken about a great many things. And so, in this year's broadband deployment report, the agency concluded that broadband deployment was insufficient, even though 98.5% of Americans have access to 4G LTE services. That's 97.99 million more Americans than just 2 years ago. In the Title II order, the Commission decided that companies like Google and Netflix needed regulatory protection from tiny broadband providers like Wave Wireless, a mom-and-pop operation in my hometown, Parsons, Kansas. And in the emerging wireline networks order, the Commission decided to slow copper retirement and let our staff fly-spec every change that a carrier might wish to make to its business model, all in the name of enhancing competition in the already competitive voice market. Now this, I would submit, is a mistake. Hokey economic models and ancient regulations are no match for a free market. Now, in each and every case, the FCC has expanded its own jurisdiction and extended its reach. And in doing so, the FCC has just started to flex its newfound powers. It's granted forbearance from many Title II consequences for now, and has declined to regulate edge providers at this time. But your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them. When I hear from some quarters of the industry, I'm not afraid, something, by the way, I'm hearing less and less these days, I follow Yoda's lead, and I say, you will be. You will be. Now, one place we may soon witness the power of the FCC's fully operational ballot station is the special access proceeding. The Commission's plans to re-regulate the special access market surfaced 3 years ago. Back then, the agency suspended the Clinton-era deregulatory framework for these services and sought comment on possible re-regulation of that market. Earlier this year, the Wireline Competition Bureau singled out 4 carriers for investigation at the behest of their competitors, emboldening those who would rather invest in regulatory arbitrage than their own infrastructure. And it looks like the FCC is headed for full-scale regulation this coming year. This would only divert even more capital away from next-generation networks, back toward the 1.5 megabit per second special access services that are 17 times slower than the FCC's own definition of broadband. Now, to be sure, some might find my lack of faith disturbing. For one might hope that an agency would not fix upon an outcome without first factoring in the evidence. But time and again, the FCC has proceeded down the regulatory path before it can collect and analyze the troves of data that we need to understand this marketplace. And it's not even clear that we'll have the data needed to analyze this marketplace fully and complete this proceeding. It took far longer than we first anticipated to collect what data we do have, and we received far less data than we originally targeted. And so we appear to be on track to make a decision, we appear set on making a decision in 2016 based on a subset of data from 2013 that ignores potential competition from serious facilities-based competitors. Now, I hope I'm wrong and that the Commission won't impose outdated rules on the enterprise data services market. But unfortunately, everything is proceeding as I have foreseen. Now, speaking of outdated rules, the Code of Federal Regulations is replete with legacy regulations that target so-called incumbents. For instance, our Part 32 rules, accounting rules, require some carriers, but not others, to hire and train specialized accountants who have to maintain a reticulated set of 148 accounts and sub-accounts designed for TDM-based telephone service. And our Part 61 tariffing rules span 39 pages, specifying how carriers must calculate their CCLs, their UCLs, APIs, and CMTs, and how those calculations differ, or potentially might differ, for inter-LATA and intra-LATA services. They even dictate the placement of the tariff's effective date in the lower right-hand corner of each page, as well as other minutiae. Now, as you might remember, C3PO remarked soon after crashing on Tatooine, we seem to be made to suffer. It's our lot in life. And I'll bet many telecom accountants have said the same thing over these many years. But even if you think that the telephone market needs regulation, these aren't the droids you're looking for. There's no federal use for the vast majority of the data required by our Part 32 accounting data. They are the very definition of needless regulation. And our Part 61 tariffing rules are even worse. As the Commission recognized 3 decades ago, tariffing presents an opportunity for collusive pricing conduct that can harm consumers through higher prices and services which don't meet their needs. So what should the Commission do? Well, first, in my view, we should follow through on last year's promise to streamline our Part 32 rules by eliminating those rules entirely for price gap carriers and replacing them with targeted accounting rules. Second, we should open a proceeding to end tariffing on all common carriers that are still subject to it, extending the successful framework that we first applied to long-distance services in the 1990s to the local exchange market of today. Thanks to Larry for the assistance.
I was going to try to spot that on.
Now, I'll be the first to admit that these aren't the most exciting topics to discuss with my 8-4 colleagues, and most likely you. I mean, after all, accounting rules, tariffing. Commissioner craves not these things. But like an ambitious Padawan, we must have the deepest commitment, the most serious mind in addressing these weedy issues if we want to reclaim our regulatory credibility. Now, the Commission will have one more chance to reconsider its approach to communications in this marketplace later this month when it addresses a forbearance petition that was filed in October 2014 by US Telecom. In that petition, US Telecom sought relief from a series of outdated regulations whose cost far exceeds any benefits. Early indications are that the majority of forbearance that is sought will be granted. As Chairman Wheeler blogged last week, these rules were adopted to protect or expand competition, but technological and market conditions have changed dramatically, making many of these rules outdated. Removing them will promote the ability of local phone companies to build out broadband and invest in modern and efficient networks. As always, I agree 100% with the chairman. Now, this is a welcome surprise to those of us who have followed the FCC's approach to forbearance over the last few years. When asked whether filing a forbearance petition would be helpful, I've gotten used to quoting Admiral Akbar. It's a trap! And that's because the agency has made granting forbearance from economic regulations significantly harder just a few years ago with the Quest Phoenix order. As the Phoenix Center persuasively has argued, it's not enough anymore for a petitioner to show that a carrier is losing out to its competition and is no longer dominant in the marketplace. Under the FCC's approach, all existing regulations are presumed necessary and in the public interest. And the evidentiary standard for overcoming that presumption is extraordinarily high. The US Telecom forbearance petition is a great opportunity for us to move past this approach. It's a much needed one, given how absurd these regulations at issue are. And take the computer inquiry rules the FCC adopted in the 1980s. These rules protect narrow band enhanced service providers, like independent voicemail operators. Now, in the digital era, it goes without saying that these providers don't need regulatory largesse. And this is because broadband, both wireline and wireless, gives consumers far more powerful and useful services. And that's one reason why the Commission, under then Chairman Janikowski, unanimously proposed to eliminate one component of these rules, the comparably efficient interconnection requirements, and it also put forward a streamlined process for the elimination of the other component, the so-called open network architecture requirements. We should do no less in this situation as well. But that's not all. There are still regulatory holdovers from the breakup of AT&T in the early 1980s that are on our books. And these rules, as old as Return of the Jedi, were intended to give competitors a chance in the then burgeoning independent long-distance services market. But take our long-distance equal access and dialing parity rules, which mandate the unbundling of local service from long distance for certain carriers. Just to recite the rules makes your eyes glaze over about how obsolete they are. And these requirements are indeed unnecessary, since all distance packages are commonplace now, and consumers buy bundled packages from their wireless or VoIP provider. And these requirements also unnecessarily raise the cost of telephone service for anyone with a landline. In sum, I would humbly submit that they are annoying as Ewoks, and they've got to go. Or, how about the requirement that incumbents unbundle a 64 kilobit per second channel when they retire copper in favor of fiber? A channel that provides a tiny fraction of the capacity of what the FCC now calls broadband, 0.25%, and it's now rarely used in practice. In fact, the chief proponent of keeping this requirement, Granite Telecommunications, admits that it has never ordered such a channel. And the obligation which remains puts carriers in a Hobson's choice. Either they retire the copper and buy expensive equipment to unbundle a channel that nobody will ever use, or they maintain the copper even though nobody is using it. Either way, the capital that could be going toward building the next generation of networks, connecting more Americans with digital opportunity, is instead spent on regulatory compliance and yesteryear's technologies. And so I think that we should drop this requirement faster than Luke ditched the Dagobah system. Now, as the Commission addresses these and other requests, there is one more thing that forbearance watchers want to know, and that is the Commission granting real, permanent relief, or something less? One possibility, of course, is that forbearance will only be temporary. That's what the FCC did repeatedly in the Title II order, as I mentioned earlier. To me, the lack of clear, permanent rules will only increase regulatory uncertainty and deter investment. And I would submit also that it's not becoming of an agency to make half-hearted attempts to forbear. As Master Yoda might say, try not, forbear, or forbear not. There is no try. Same here. Another possibility is that the agency will opt for forbearance, to borrow an apt term coined by my colleague and friend, Commissioner O'Reilly. And that's when the agency says that it will forbear from a statutory provision, but then claims to nevertheless enforce it using the FCC's general jurisdiction. Or, as Obi-Wan might say, strike down this rule, and it will become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. This is a pernicious practice, and it's one that I simply can't support. I look forward to reviewing Chairman Wheeler's proposed resolution of the U.S. Telecom forbearance petition in the coming weeks. And I hold out hope that the FCC will revise our aging telephone service rules in light of the new competitive marketplace. Outdated regulatory roadblocks are bad for consumers. They are bad for infrastructure investment, and most of all, they are bad for Americans' economic competitiveness. After all, as you know, networks don't have to be built. Capital doesn't have to be spent. Risks don't have to be taken. And so when the FCC makes it less attractive for companies to connect to the American people, those companies will find other places, and they have, to put their money. And here's why, in closing, I think all of this ultimately matters. The digital revolution is unleashing a tremendous amount of entrepreneurship and innovation. I've seen it for myself in Reno, Nevada, and Savannah, Georgia, that anyone with a good idea and a broadband connection can compete in the online marketplace. And the internet is also putting people in charge of their own lives in unprecedented ways. Again, I've seen it for myself in New Orleans and North Dakota, how people are using internet-based technologies like Uber and Meerkat and Facebook and Instagram to drive their own destinies. Search your own feelings. You know it to be true. The startup entrepreneurs in Kansas City recently told me that high-speed broadband is putting previously neglected places in the Midwest on the map. And to them and to others around the country who rely on this world-envied platform, I would say, great kids, but don't get cocky. Or it takes a market-oriented regulatory approach to deliver the internet that is the great equalizer of our time. So, in sum, thank you once again for giving me the Duvall Award. I hope to be worthy of it in the time to come. And in the meantime, may the force be with you, always.
And so with that, we come to the conclusion of our 15th annual symposium. I'd like to thank all of our panelists who helped out. I'd like to thank in particular the very nice young lady working the table, which is my daughter. So say hello again. We are never against using children at the meeting center to score policy points, and we're better when they have more administration. Thank you all again. Don't forget this summer our annual cigar event up on the roof. And thank you very much, and San Luis, appreciate everybody coming out. Thanks. See you next year.